Hello, hello. Welcome. It's noon, or a little past noon, and I'm here to talk about perfectionism today. Um, if you suffer from perfectionism, I mean, there's lots of jokes that we make about it, and you've probably been teased about it, but you know that um, it actually isn't funny, all right? It's not a funny thing. It actually kind of takes its toll on your life, right? It kind of sucks. If you suffer from perfectionism, you know that it causes you anxiousness and it causes you worry and it causes you stress and it kind of feeds your insecurities and your fears, and physically it's exhausting and it drains you, right? So that's all going on, but the bigger thing that perfectionism does for us is that, the thing that nobody really talks about is really that it steals your happiness, right? Which is kind of ironic because when we're in the pursuit of perfectionism, we often think that we're pursuing perfectionism to bring us happiness, right? And that just absolutely isn't the case. So today I'm going to be serving up an antidote to perfectionism with a side of seeing new possibility for yourself. And I'm really glad you're here. So say hi if you're here, or hi later when you watch the replay. Because I really want to be able to welcome you. And if you have any questions, also type those in there as we go along, and I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so we've been talking in Imperfect and Unapologetic a lot about what we're calling, or what I'm calling, audacious grace, right? And so if you're new to the group, a quick recap of what that is that audacious grace is just a conscious practice, like a simple daily practice woven in with your other habits, your other daily habits, of just taking note of the simple and significant things in your life that you can audaciously, gracefully thank the universe for, thank God for, thank the powers that be, spirit, whatever it is that you call those omnipresent powers that govern our world, our universe. So it came about just because it occurred to me that I consider myself a very considerate person, a very polite person. I use my manners. I thank people all the time, but I actually wasn't really thanking God a whole lot, or I wasn't thanking the universe a whole lot. And we're all pretty blessed. I mean, we're all, if we're living in Canada where I'm at, or in the US, or any like developed country, we are extremely blessed. And a lot of those things we take for granted, we don't acknowledge, we don't see. And by taking a moment to just kind of scan your day, scan your experiences, and take note of these simple and significant blessings that you experience in your life, it creates a whole new paradigm shift in your mind about how you view your life and about how you view your place in the world. So I call this audacious grace, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about how that is effective and beneficial for perfectionists. And I'm also going to talk about how practicing audacious grace actually helps you to see new possibility for yourself. So audacious grace is effective and beneficial practice for perfectionists, because as perfectionists, we go through our life and we focus on what is wrong, right? Because the perfectionist mind wants to locate everything that's wrong so it can make it right or perfect, and therefore avoid failure, criticism, humiliation, vulnerability, or any type of exposure of not being perfect. Okay. And I've talked about this before in Imperfect and Unapologetic, that perfectionism really is just a coping mechanism, right? So I don't want you to beat yourself up about it. I don't want you to criticize yourself for having those perfectionistic tendencies, because really perfectionism is just a coping mechanism. But like all coping mechanisms, they serve their purpose in our childhood or our formative years. But as we become adults and we want to evolve and we want to grow our life and we want to expand past our past, get beyond our past and beyond our childhood, we need to actually release those coping mechanisms, because as adults, those coping mechanisms hinder us. So we needed them in childhood, but we don't need them anymore. So the intentional practice of directing your brain to look for what is right instead of what is wrong, or what is good instead of what is bad, is how we begin to grow beyond our perfectionism survival mechanism. So it's so important and vital to our happiness, because that old coping mechanism of perfectionism actually keeps your brain in the past, where it needed that coping mechanism to stay safe and navigate your life and do cope, right? The coping mechanism. You needed that to cope in your past, in your childhood. But now it actually holds you back and hinders you. So this actually triggers when we're in the past, when we're living, continuing to repeat, continuing to operate from, continuing to function using that coping mechanism. It actually triggers the old fears and the old memories, and it keeps us playing them over and over in our head, which keeps us mentally stuck there, right? Mentally stuck there, which means that we're also emotionally stuck in the past, right? We're living in the fear state that developed these coping mechanisms. So practicing audacious grace is just a really simple, practical way, a very easy way to start to release that coping mechanism and start to shift it another way. So practicing audacious grace does two things to grow you beyond the outdated and frankly debilitating coping mechanism of perfectionism. So the first thing is that it brings your brain into the present, right? So it takes you out of reliving the pain, the hurt, the fears of the past. Because if you're noticing the things that are happening in your life today that are blessings, that are good fortune, that are luck, that bring you happiness and joy, then you're actually in the present, right? You're in the moment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it actually focuses your mind on the positive. So when your mind is focused on something pleasurable, something uplifting, something positive or joyful, it actually can't simultaneously just two separate parts of the brain. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's just very succinctly and simply how practicing audacious grace, which is really just, I mean, you could call it simple thank you if you want, but I'm kind of like, over the top that way. So audacious grace is the umbrella title that I give it. And it really is just about practicing daily gratitude, but doing it in a way that is like actually directed to God, directed to the universe, directed to the powers that be, where you're really acknowledging all of the ways that you are blessed, right? So in this way, audacious grace counteracts the coping mechanism of perfectionism. So it loosens its grip on your brain. to allow your brain to grow beyond it by creating like literally new pathways, new neural pathways in your mind that begin to look in your environment for the positive things, that look for the good in your life rather than looking for what's wrong, which is what the coping mechanism of perfectionism is, as I said earlier, right? So this helps you to create new life skills, new life design skills that actually better your life, make your life better, make you happier, make you see all of the ways that you are actually doing well in life and that you have a good life. Because one of the real side effects to being a perfectionist is when you are always focusing on all the things that are wrong so that you can try to fix them in an attempt to be perfect, to avoid all of those negative things we fear will happen if we're not perfect. You actually start to feel pretty bad about yourself, pretty awful about yourself. And so just a way to turn that around, a way to shift that is to begin to look for all the audacious grace in your life, okay? And I also promised you that I was going to talk about 5 facts about audacious grace that will help you see new possibility for yourself. So seeing new possibility for yourself is so vital to your well-being, to your health, your happiness, because hope is essential for a well-lived life. We have to have hope. We have to believe in the good of our lives, the possibility that we have. We have to have hope. That's what keeps us going, right? Hope is like the antidote to depression. So being able to see new possibility for yourself is so key in really living that life that you desire. So it's a key component to life design. So I'm going to talk about how audacious grace helps you to see new possibility. And there's 5 ways that it does that. So the first one is when you're in the midst of stress, hopelessness, defeat, even, you're in crisis, right? Your brain is designed when you're in crisis to map out or like create a GPS of a different path to help you cope, right? So the practice of audacious grace actually, as I said, creates that new neural pathway in the brain that becomes those mental paths that not only lead you out of that suffering, but also help you to see the lesson in that experience and gain the personal growth from that experience that will help you then build on that to create more happiness going forward, more success, new possibility. So you know that if you have a tendency to, for example, go into self-criticism, when things get bad, when you're in crisis, when you're stressed, you if that's your tendency to start to like beat yourself up and blame yourself and start to wear all the negativity from the experience, that's what I mean by the brain has created its own patterns for how it copes with things. And by starting to look for what is good in your life, then what you're starting to do is you're starting to create new pathways for your brain. And the fascinating thing about the brain is that when you start to think new thoughts, you actually are creating new neural pathways in your brain. So if you think of it as when you start to walk a path through tall grass, initially when you walk through the tall grass, you kind of have to it's the grass is really high. It's kind of hard to get through. It's not an easy pathway. But the more you walk that path, the more the grass gets wore down and the path gets easier to follow and easier to walk. And then pretty soon you don't have to even think about walking that path. You just walk it. That's exactly how the brain works. So The thoughts you've been thinking your whole life are those well-worn paths. But if they're not serving you, then it's time to create a new path. It's time to walk a new path in your life. And that takes effort initially at first. It takes conscious effort. It takes conscious effort to start to look for the good things in your life and take note of them in a journal, write them down, take pictures of them. I talked in the last Facebook Live last week about some different ways that you can do that. Write it on a slip of paper, put it in a jar. Whatever technique works for you, make it simple so that you actually do it. But that is going to help create that new pathway in your mind. And the more you walk it, the easier it's going to be. And what's fascinating is then the old pathway that you were used to walking, the grass actually grows back up on it. And so it's not as easy to walk anymore. It's like those neural pathways actually atrophy in your mind. So the brain is an amazing thing. It's a tool that we have to use in our life for our best life. And we can use it for our own advantage, okay? So a second way that practicing audacious grace helps you see new possibility for yourself is waiting for happiness actually limits your brain's capacity to see potential. Isn't that interesting? Like just waiting for happiness actually limits your brain's capacity to see potential and possibility. But when you're cultivating happiness through the daily practice of audacious grace, what you're doing is you're actually activating your higher thinking brain. So that's like your prefrontal cortex, which is the creative, solution generating, problem solving part of the brain that needs to be activated if you are to see new possibilities or imagine new possibilities or recognize new possibilities for yourself. So if you're just waiting for things to happen, you're not likely to see them. But if you're actually intentionally cultivating happiness through practicing audacious grace, you've already activated that part of your brain that's actually going to see more possibility for you than you could have seen before. All right, that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so the third way that practicing audacious grace helps you see new possibility for yourself is creating and sustaining change that allows you to see and access new possibility for yourself requires you to have willpower. But willpower is a limited resource, right? And it's a limited resource that evaporates very quickly with mental exhaustion. So making a lot of decisions in a day, right, will actually mentally exhaust you. So your willpower begins to be exhausted and eventually it fails. And when our willpower fails, what we do is we fall back on our old habits to determine our choices and our actions. So when we establish a habit of audacious grace, we are creating a positive habit that will influence our positive choices and actions that will actually continue to sustain us and move us forward in a positive direction where we're going to see and experience new possibilities, even when the limited resource of willpower has been depleted, right? Because willpower goes and then we fall back on our habits. So if we have that habit of audacious grace, that's a really good habit to fall back on, right? And that's going to keep us being able to see new possibility for ourselves. All right, so the fourth way that audacious grace helps you to see new possibility for yourself is that audacious grace is more skilled at noticing and focusing on positive possibilities for your own personal growth, for your own achievement, for your own happiness. So because the brain can only focus on so much and cannot simultaneously hold two opposing thoughts that I talked about earlier, right? You can't be in happiness and fear at the same time because those are two different centers of the brain. So what happens is when we can't be in two parts of our brain at once and the brain can only focus on so much at one time, when you're focusing on audacious grace, it actually pushes out the negative thoughts, the small annoyances, the frustrations, and you're focused on the positives instead, right? So you actually become more optimistic, which is great, right? I read something recently where I think it was Tim Ferriss said something about, if you've heard about him, he wrote like the book, The 4-Hour Work Week. And he said that he asked a friend of his, he doesn't have any kids, but he asked a friend of his who has kids and said, what do you think is the most positive, the best thing, the most important thing, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that you can teach your kids? And his friend said to teach them to be optimistic. And I was like, I wish somebody had told me that 20 years ago. My daughter's going to be 20 next in 2 weeks. And I thought that was brilliant. So I didn't know that when I had my kids. I didn't know that growing up, but I know that now, right? So optimism is a skill that we can all learn, right? And audacious grace is something that helps us to learn optimism. So what's fascinating about optimism is, just like negativity, it actually creates its own momentum, right? And you know that. The more negative you get, the more upset you get, the more stressed you get, the more stressed you get, the more upset you get, the more negative you get, right? It builds on itself. But optimism is exactly the same way. So the more that you see in your life to be audaciously grateful for, the more optimistic you become. The more optimistic you become, the more you see to be grateful for. And the more you're grateful for, the more you actually experience things to be grateful for. So that actually builds on itself as well, right? So the better you get at scanning your life and experiences for good things to thank God or the universe for, the more good things you actually notice, right? The more optimistic you become and the more you find to be grateful for without even trying, because now your brain you've instructed your brain to seek out the positives, and the brain is so exceptional at scanning its environment to locate matches that it's directed to find, and disregarding what does not match the mental image of what it is seeking. So therefore, if you're instructing your brain to look for the positives, it's going to see more positives. It's going to see more optimistic experiences and opportunities and possibilities. And it's going to just absolutely disregard anything that does not match that. So I think you've heard me say it before, where I say, like, what you focus on, you're going to see. I mean, that makes sense, right? Like when you look at something, you're going to see it, right? So when you're looking for what is good in your life, you're going to find it. You're going to see it. All right. And number 5, the 5th thing of how audacious grace will help you see new possibility for yourself is that practicing audacious grace makes you feel better. That's it. Makes you feel better. It makes you feel more positive. It makes you feel more grateful, right? And when you have these emotions, these positive emotions, your emotions are what trigger your actions, right? And your actions are what get you the results in your life, right? So you actually, just by practicing audacious grace, you start to feel better, you start to act better, and you start to get better results in your life, right? So all of these positive emotions, and then the intentional actions that come from them that are inspired and motivated, creative, you become more efficient, more productive, all of these things. So these positive emotional states not only help create new results in your life, but what's really interesting is they actually help you to be more resilient, right? More resilient and more capable of overcoming obstacles to actually experience new possibilities for yourself. All right. So thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. And I want to say hi to Karen. Katrina's here. Thank you guys for being here. I want to hear all about how you guys are experiencing audacious grace in your life. I know that from your posts that both of you do this, both of you in your own way practice gratitude. And I know that you've experienced exceptional results, positive results as a result of that. And thank you for being here. I wish you a fantastic rest of your day. And I will talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye.